Good evening. Lorraine says it's getting to be a habit. A good habit. One that's giving me a great deal of joy. Probably you won't mind if I take a few minutes to speak on a subject that is very close to me, and one that is not always understood, more especially by our students. Too often I hear the word impersonal in our work. Impersonal truth or impersonal God or impersonal relationships. And I'm not very strong for that impersonality. First of all, I don't know whether I've said this in a Chicago meeting or not, but I know that I have on some other occasion. To me, God is very personal. I would never be at all understood if I were to say that I understand an impersonal God. I don't. I can understand the impersonal nature of God in the sense that God would not have favorites, or God would not pick out some one person on whom to confer its or his benedictions and blessings. I can understand that the nature of God is impersonal in that its rain must fall on the just and the unjust. Its blessings must be equally those of the saint and the sinner. And if there is any shade of difference, it would be on the part of the sinner getting the benefit. Saints often have a way, of being very, very self-righteous and goody-goody, and thereby lose much of God's grace. I remember the Master saying something to the effect that God had more pleasure in one sinner that was redeemed, lost, than the 99 good ones. And I think the proportion still holds good. I have found in the 10 years in which I'm teaching this message that my relationship with the students is not impersonal. There's something very, very personal about it. Personal in this sense. That every student that comes to my attention or that brings themselves to my attention, their life becomes important to me. Their spiritual progress becomes important. I glory in every step of spiritual unfoldment that they experience and every bit of fruitage that comes into their lives. And when they're struggling toward that, it's my joy to work with them, whether in person, as I have done with many with whom I've had the opportunity to be present, or by mail. Those here who have experienced that know that there's no limit to the amount of letter writing that I can do when the occasion warrants it, and when the student is able to accept the instruction, even if sometimes it comes in a very severe way. All of that to me is personal. In the same way, when students are going through difficulties, that becomes personal to me. And I go far out of my way to help them through those periods and to stand by with them. And it's just as personal to me when they fall by the wayside, as some inevitably do. I'm sure there was nothing impersonal in the relationship between Jesus Christ and his disciples and his apostles and the 200. I'm sure that his teaching and his relationship with them was both close and personal, and I'm sure that when he saw Judas about to fall away, that he grieved in a very personal way too. Not for his own life, but for what he knew Judas would have to go through to get back on the beam again. Having had 3 years with Judas, I'm convinced that he knew that Judas was made of good stuff, that Judas Iscariot had deep spiritual possibilities and potentialities, and that therefore he knew that eventually Judas Iscariot was going to be back in the fold. I'm sure that he must have grieved as he stood there and saw Peter hiding, Peter denying him. I'm sure that was a very personal feeling, and not for himself, but for Peter. And I'm sure that he must have rejoiced in a very personal way when he saw Peter come back into the fold so quickly and show as clearly as he did that it was a momentary aberration with him and one quickly to be forgotten. I am sure that the spiritual teachers whom I have met around the world feel a deep love for their students, a deep rejoicing in those that prosper spiritually, a deep regret for those who do not seem to have the capacity to grasp the meaning of a spiritual way of life. And I know that it has always been that way with me. As a matter of fact, I am aware of the fact that it is often said of me that I have pets and that I have favorites. And you may be assured of this, that it's true. I have. There's never been a time when I haven't had favorites and pets, and I don't believe there ever will be a time. And the reason is that having gone through deep struggles to achieve even a tiny measure of this spiritual light, I can remember clearly those practitioners and teachers who were faithful, loving, kind, generous in their work with me. I can remember the patience that some of them had to exercise with me because I wasn't an easy student. And knowing what I went through to achieve even a small measure, I have that same feeling every time I see a student anywhere trying to break through this mesmeric sense, this personal sense of self. And it's for that reason that when I find students struggling with sincerity, that it is my joy to work harder with them and perhaps outwardly seem to be making a pet of them. Really, it isn't so much making a pet of them as it is giving them the additional time or effort that they may require at some particular point of their unfoldment. A year or two later, that may not be necessary, and probably by that time it is said I have another pet. So it is in this work. I have a very tender feeling, and I call it a personal feeling, when I think of cities like San Francisco that gave us first, second, and third San Francisco lectures, metaphysical notes, consciousness unfolding, the Master speaks. Now, you know, you just couldn't sit in the presence of several hundred students who could bring such a message out of you without feeling a deep personal feeling of warmth for them and for the city that brought it through. In the same way, I don't suppose that I ever will be able to pass through Seattle, Washington, or Portland, Oregon, without stopping, for the self-same reason. Hundreds upon hundreds of students have been through class after class with me there, and some of the finest messages that are in the Infinite Way writings have come out of those cities. So it is that here, where we also have had very special messages, I'm thinking now of that little small group at the reading room, and then this last Chicago class, when several wonderful experiences took place on this platform. It would be an impossibility to think of this city and think of the students who have been here in this work without a personal feeling of love, of warmth, and of a desire to pour out all that the Father could possibly give. Because it has already been demonstrated the degree of receptivity there is here in this room among you who have been through so much of this work with me. Now, I bring this to your attention for this reason. As you know, I do not like to hear the message of the Infinite Way referred to as an absolute teaching, because I have seen through inner revelation that the only absolute teaching there can be is one that is imparted without words and without thoughts. We have had teaching of that kind in our work. Every once in a while I find a student or two or three able to receive such teaching, and we have it. We have long periods of complete silence in which no word is spoken and none thought, and yet the message is conveyed. That's an absolute teaching, because no personal sense enters into it, either in imparting or receiving. It is completely accomplished on the spiritual plane. You may recall the fact that the things of God are foolishness with men, that the natural man cannot receive the things of God. Well, when you come to the absolute, and you are in the divine consciousness, and the human sense of truth has dropped away, truth itself imparts itself through the teacher consciousness, and where the student is receptive, that teaching is received, not in their mind. And it is for that reason that they couldn't sit down and pass an examination in it tomorrow, because they didn't receive it in the mind, they received it in the soul, and the only way you have of knowing that they received it is that the light is shining in their face, and the fruits of the Spirit are appearing in their experience. In the same way, to me, this teaching is personal. It is not impersonal. It has to do with an individual who today is a teacher, working with one who today is a student, meeting them on the level of the spirit, of the soul, thereby forming a bond greater than any human relationship that has ever been known. It's closer than the relationship that exists between man or wife or parent and child. It is a deeper relationship because it has in it none of the personal sense of selfishness that sometimes and very often comes into those relationships of man and wife and parent and child. There is no sense of self in it, and the reason is neither teacher nor student gain anything of a temporal nature from that contact of spiritual unfoldment. They receive only the Spirit and the fruits of the Spirit, and it isn't something that they receive so much as something that they in turn give, impart to others. Very often it is believed, more especially since some of this unrealistic literature is available about masters, sometimes it is believed that one should aspire to be a master, that one should have as a goal the attaining of mastership, and very few realize, because this particular literature doesn't mention it, that in becoming a master, one has become a servant. One no longer has a life of one's own. One no longer has the right to consider oneself. And everything that concerns one at that stage is not for oneself, but for the activity of the message. And so it is that in this relationship that becomes so personal, it becomes beautiful because neither one can personally benefit by it. It requires a greater sacrifice both on the part of the teacher and the student because of the greater demands that are made upon them through the very activity of the Christ functioning in their consciousness. So it is. This is personal. It is not sensual, but personal in the sense that it creates a bond of friendship and a bond of love that is absolutely, well, beyond all human thought of those relationships. There is a bond that exists, and I'm finding it now all over this globe, not merely from the students toward me or from me to the students, but as our students are beginning to travel and meet with students in other parts of the globe, they come back and tell of that same bond that they have found in visiting in other cities or in other countries. This year especially, and last year, several of our students had the opportunity of traveling in foreign countries and meeting our groups in these different countries and coming home with the same story that we here have found in these groups of friendships and relationships established deeper than anything that could possibly be accounted for on the human plane. So it is. In our relationship with each other, let us not be afraid to make it personal, yet spiritually personal in the sense that we make no demands upon each other beyond the demands of spiritual unfoldment, spiritual exchange, spiritual love, spiritual friendship, and more the giving sense than the demanding sense, and yet always the willingness to share. If we can successfully do that with ourselves, we can more successfully do it in our relationship with God. To say that one loves God whom one has not seen, but not to love one's fellow man whom one has seen, it says you're a liar. So it is. The deeper the love that exists between students on the spiritual path, the deeper will the love be that they feel toward God. And here you have a strange subject, this thing of love toward God or for God. You know, there aren't many people in the world that really and truly feel a warm love toward God or for God. Love is something of an abstract word, an abstraction itself, and certainly the love of an unknown or invisible God is something not very tangible or warm. And yet eventually there must come into individual consciousness a love for God that is deeper than any love that any human has ever known on earth. Now that cannot be if we persist in thinking of God as an impersonal principle or an impersonal law or an impersonal life. Of course, God is all that. God is an impersonal Lord. God is an impersonal love. God is an impersonal life, but God is more than this. Our poet says that God is closer than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. And I'm sure that he wasn't thinking in terms of something as cold as mathematics, or even as impersonal as music. I'm sure that he must have felt a warmth that was close to his heart. He must have felt, almost you might say, a personal presence. We wonder sometimes that Christians, some Christians, have found a deep personal love toward the man Jesus. And when you stop to think that he hasn't been on earth for 2,000 years, that might seem strange, that a real, true, warm love could develop toward one who hasn't been around for these 2,000 years. And yet it is a fact that there are Christians who have come into such close contact with what associates itself in their mind as Jesus Christ as to bring about a depth of love toward that man beyond anything they have known in human experience. We find the same thing in the Hindus' love of Gautama, the Buddha, or Krishna. We find the same love with certain mystics toward St. John. Once in a while even toward Paul, although Paul seems to have brought forth less of a deep personal love than these others. And sometimes we wonder that can be, that you can love John, that you could love Buddha, that you could love Krishna, you could love Jesus, and so far as we know, they're only names. Be assured of this. Where this love has evolved, they are not merely names, they are actual identities. They are actual identities that we meet within our own being with as great a livingness as if they were physical forms in front of us. And it is for that reason that this love is generated. Now, I'm not speaking of emotional neurotics who develop a religious complex. I'm talking now of deep, sincere Christians or Hindus who actually attain the center of their own being and there meet with that mind which was in Christ Jesus, meet with that very soul which was the soul of the beloved John, or the other. In the same way, God, in the experience of most of us up to a certain point, God is just a word. God is something or other from whom or through whom we expect to receive something. God is an unknown toward which we are striving to reach and for a purpose. God, it would appear, has within its power the gift of health to give us, the gift of supply, of companionship, of home. Always, it seems that God has something, and we're trying our best to reach God in order to get it. Sometimes, in the orthodox sense, there are those who reach some point where they really demonstrate that which they're hoping for. And certainly, in the metaphysical world, there is a great deal of demonstration of things and persons and conditions. And I suppose it generates a feeling of gratitude. Oh, thank you, God, I got what I wanted. That's far from being love. The love of which I speak is a love that comes of a union, when like meets like, when we are in the highest state of our spiritual being, and we come face to face with that which is truly God. It's God the Father and God the Son meeting in that union, and that is when the love is generated. That is when the love is felt. Not for a reason, not because we received our demonstration, not because we gained that which we sought, but for the reason that we have found our home. Poetically, we might say we found our home in His bosom. And it seems like that, too. It's very much like that. Actually, since only God can tabernacle with God, it is only when you and I rise above our humanhood into a state of spiritual being, spiritual awareness, that we can meet God. And then it literally is that it's God fusing with God. God coming into conscious union or oneness with God. In our human experience, of course, the same idea would be when we meet a person of our own level of thought at the moment and fall in love, or form a deep and life-lasting friendship. And those things happen over and over and over again, that some woman meets another woman, or some man meets another man, or some woman meets a man, or a man meets a woman, and in one instant there is a fusion. And they know that they've known each other since time began, and as time evolves they find that they have the same things in common. They like the same music, or they like the same literature, or they like the same religion, or they like the same home life, and or the same sports. And so life is lived as one instead of two. It is that, on a higher plane, that takes place when we come face to face with God. We have met our own. We have met our own self in another form. We have met our own state of being. And then comes a communion. It is as personal a communion as friends can know. It is an actual meeting within in these periods of meditation. And it would seem in those moments as if it were an interchange. That is, as if there was something flowing from the person to God, and then something flowing back from God to the person. Seems a little difficult to believe that God would need anything that we have. And probably it isn't so that God needs, but rather that since I and the Father are one, that which is of the Father that flows to the Son is likewise flowing back from the Son to the Father, in the same way that love passes from the parent to the child and then is reflected back to the parent again. So it is that it would seem that there is this interchange, this flow. Always something going out from oneself to God, something flowing back from God to oneself. And in that communion, there is ultimately the realization that we have nothing of ourselves, that whatever it is that we have, whether of love or wisdom or guidance or direction, is really of the Father, and that what we have or use is actually the capacity, the ability of the Father, rather than of our own. There is a height that is sometimes reached when that communion is transcended, and when the personal self disappears and nothing is left but God. That is a rare experience in anyone's life. Some who have known it only once in their lifetime. Some have known it twice or 3 times or 4 times. Some few know it almost at will, can enter into the relationship almost at will. Actually, it is a rare thing, and you will find it in mystical literature in these passages in which the mystic describes himself as the life of the blade of grass, or the life of the flower, or the life of the bird, and feels himself a part of a bird life, or animal life, or plant life. You find that in Walt Whitman, and you find it in some of the English mystics. Those particular periods in which you can almost feel yourself flowing through the oceans, through trees, through clouds, through the sun. They are rare moments, but they are probably the periods of preparation for the life that ultimately awaits every spiritual student, which is the life of Melchizedek. Remember that our goal on the spiritual path is never achieved until we come into the realization of the life of Melchizedek. That is, the life in which we actually know that we were never born and will never die. And we can watch the body as impersonally as we can watch our automobile. And as the day inevitably comes when we trade in that old car for a new, we can just as impersonally watch as we trade in this sense of body for the newer and higher and more spiritual sense of body that must inevitably come to those who realize that even as individual identity with form, that they were never born and will never die. You can see now why the infinite way has its entire basis in meditation. Why meditation had to be its underlying principle. In September, the Reader's Digest had an article showing the value of meditation. And this article went so far as to show that even a hard-headed businessman could benefit in his business by breaking into his periods of the day with meditation, excusing himself from conferences to have an inner meditation or period of spiritual contemplation. In other words, the Reader's Digest was trying to show that meditation is a very practical thing. I believe it was the month of March, the Reader's Digest again published an article on the value of meditation and the value of contemplating nature and that which underlies nature. Strange that a magazine like the Reader's Digest should find such a tremendous interest in the subject of meditation. But when you understand that they have their finger on the pulse of this entire world in all languages, you will know that they would never have published the first one, and certainly never the second one, unless they had definite indication that meditation is about to enter conscious human awareness and be recognized to a great enough extent to warrant their publishing it and helping to bring the subject into a wider knowledge. Now, in between these two articles, as you know, the great publishing house of Harper's also saw fit to introduce meditation to the world through this book, The Art of Meditation, and to arrange with the British publishers, George Allen and Unwin, for its British publication. Probably elsewhere in the literature of today, you are finding more and more references to meditation, more and more references to a contemplation of reality or contemplating God. Well, it was in 1934 that this work of meditation revealed itself to me and has been the basis of my work ever since, and I feel that our work has been one of those instruments of unfolding consciousness through which meditation is going to be brought to the Occidental world, to the Western world. It will come through many avenues, but up to this present time, this book, Practicing the Presence, and The Art of Meditation, are really the only two textbooks available on that subject. Now, as a further step, some of you have not heard, probably. I'm sure all of you will be glad to know that when the editor of the Episcopal Church News, the official Episcopal organ, was asked to choose, I believe it was 20 books, out of 900 as recommended reading for all Protestants, The Art of Meditation was one of those books. And so, The Art of Meditation, our book, The Art of Meditation, now goes into the wider field of Protestants all over the United States and Canada. But what is much more important than what happens to my book is that the subject of meditation is being introduced not merely into the metaphysical world, but into the entire Protestant world of the United States and Canada, and through the British edition, into all of the British Commonwealths. Now see what I'm driving at. That we should be an instrument through which this happens to the whole world is a beautiful thing. But of far greater importance is the fact that this subject should now be given worldwide awareness, regardless whether it comes through us or through others. It just happens to be a fortuitous circumstance and a joyous one for us that we are an instrument, and perhaps at the present time the largest instrument, the greatest, through which this is coming. But let us not rejoice so much in that as the fact that meditation itself is now being presented to this world, not only the world of metaphysicians, but the entire religious world, or Protestant religious world, as a subject for study and for reading. Do you know why this is so important? For the same reason that it was important in our experience, in our work. You cannot meditate for many months or many years until you come in contact with that Father within you. Now, we have been reading about the Father within you ever since the Bible was published in 1611, over 400 years ago. That means that the Protestant world and the Catholic world has been hearing for over 400 years about the Father within you and the kingdom of God within you. And how many people have ever found that Father within them or the kingdom of God within them? Only those who, through contemplation and meditation, actually found the ability to go within themselves, reach the center of their own being, and there meet face to face this God of whom we have been speaking tonight. Do you know what you feel toward those in this room with whom you've sat before in classes, tape recordings, readings, as you remember that they know the same things you know, that they love the same things you love, that your interest is in the same direction, do you know the feeling you have for each other? Do you know the feeling we have for each other? Can you imagine what is going to happen in this world after just a few years of everybody meditating and finding the secrets that you and I have found? Have found that love that we find because our interests are in the same direction, because our goal is the same? Do you know how impossible it would be for us to steal from each other, cheat each other, defraud each other? I mean, that's kind of unthinkable, isn't it? That's really out of the question. If there is any place in the world where there is an absolute union of interest, it's in this room. Yes, but what made it? Only one thing made it, was our meditation. Because in going within ourselves, we found each other. We found the same God, we found the same Son of God, we found the same interest, we found the same path, we found the same goal, we found the same interest in life, and instead of people or a group of people who are intent on getting from each other, it is probably as true as anything ever can be that in this room and in the other groups that have been like us here, that our major purpose is to share with everybody in this room whatever of unfolding good is given to us. Can you imagine what a world we're going to be living in when everybody is meditating and finding that same desire to share with their neighbor that we have to share with each other? When everyone has that same feeling of wanting to give to each other that we have, instead of get from each other? All of this is going to be brought about through meditation. You might say, don't you mean it's going to be brought about through God? No, I don't. I mean through meditation. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God isn't going to add anything new to this world. God isn't going to do a thing tomorrow that God isn't doing today. It is through meditation that we are going to come into the actual experience of God, the meeting with God, the union with God and with each other through God. Meditation is going to bring that to us. What we find when we get into meditation has always been there, awaiting our readiness to do some meditating. So it is. In the degree of our meditation, it's going to be the degree of our God awareness. In the degree, in the time, effort, love that we pour into meditation is going to be the fruitage that we derive from it. But at any level, and even a little drop of meditation is going to work wonders for this world, because in going inside of our own being and finding even the tiniest touch of God, we're going to find a release from fear, a release from hate, a release from self-seeking, from self-preservation. We're going, even with that first little drop, that first touch of God in us, we're going to lose a great deal of the material sense that has acted as a separation from our good. In this Practicing the Presence, there is a chapter that to me is of highest significance. The title of it is Love Thy Neighbor. And of course, if you listen to that in an orthodox sense, you'll say, well, that's an old story. We've always been told to love our neighbor, but how do you do it? And then we begin to hear how difficult it is because of what our neighbor has been doing to us. Of course, that leaves no room in us for remembering what we've done to our neighbor. But through meditation, this chapter revealed within me the impossibility of loving our neighbor until we came to the realization that our neighbor is ourself, and that ourself is our neighbor. And this brought me back to probably the basic passage of all spiritual literature, I am. I am in thee, and thou art in me. I in thee, and thou in me, and all the rest of these in me, and I in them. And that brought forth this entire chapter's unfoldment, that what I do, of good or of evil, I do unto me. For is there any beside me, says Isaiah? I know not any. There is only me. There is only I. And the I of me is the I of you. When I realize that, I instantly realize, let's call it, my sins. And I begin immediately to see how important it is that I either forgive myself or hang myself, one or the other. Because I must do one or the other. If I remember my sins, I either must say, well, I can't stand facing myself much longer, or I must forgive myself. If I forgive myself, then I can see that if I can't do that with my neighbor, I haven't really done it with myself. Now watch this very carefully. You will come to that point where you will say to yourself, I can't look at myself much longer unless I can forgive myself. And when you've forgiven yourself, you'll realize, if I could forgive myself, I'm sure that I can forgive everyone else that's ever been on this globe. That leads to the ultimate realization that there never was another, but it always was the self of me that was acting against me, even when it appeared to come through Jones, Brown, or Smith. Always it was something in my consciousness that drew to me that which I got, for good or evil. The Master knew this when he said, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. He knew this when later it was given to us that if you sow to the Spirit, you reap life everlasting. If you sow to the flesh, if you reap to the flesh, you sow. Now, if you sow to the flesh, you reap corruption. He knew that. He knew that everything that took place within our own being. Well, of course, at first glance, you're apt to deny that that's true. Because you can look at the vast amount of good you've done in the world and the little amount of evil you've done, and you say they don't balance. But unfortunately, it isn't quite that way. It isn't how much good you've done or how much evil you've done. It is how much of ignorance you have entertained about your relationship with God and man. One need never have been an actual sinner to be reaping all the punishments that hell ever knew. Not through conscious sin, but through ignorance. For ignorance is as much a sin as sin itself. In other words, to believe that there is another is to separate ourselves from the love of God. And that can be done just through the ignorance that has been placed on the religious teachings of all the world. As you come to this, you will learn the importance, at least I learned, the importance of the word I. And I came to see that when I said I meant you as well as I meant Joel. That there was only this one divine ego, this one, call it mind, call it spirit, call it soul, but that was you as well as it was me. And everything that I was doing of good, when I thought I was doing it to patients or students, I was doing it to myself. Every bit of evil that has ever come through my thought, even when it seemed to me that others must be paying a penalty for it, I know now, was coming right back into my own selfhood. For so it is. There is an inner activity always taking place within us. And this activity appears outwardly as love, but sometimes self-love, but sometimes selfish love. Even in the indulgence of that, we are in the end wronging ourselves. I would like, between tonight and tomorrow, those of you who have this practicing the presence, that you read this chapter, Love Thy Neighbor. Because I would like, when we come together, that we be even more united than we are at this moment, in the realization that I am you, and that you are I. And the reason is this. To break down the sense of duality in this experience, you must eventually come to see that there is no law of evil operating against you. But you must also come to see that there is no law of good operating for you. That actually I, that infinite, invisible, divine presence within us, is the only power. And it doesn't operate for us or against us. It operates as our very being. It is our selfhood. The power of good, the presence of good, the power of God, the presence of God is our real identity. It isn't something outside that acts for our good, nor is there an evil power outside that can act for our destruction. Scripture says, I create good and I create evil. In the sense, then, that I realize one infinite identity, and that God, manifest as the Son of God, which you are and which I am, in that realization, then, I have broken down the power of good and the power of evil, and in exchange, I have taken on immortality or divine sonship. You see, the infinite way is not really a message of exchanging our human evils for human good. It appears so to many, more especially to those with a metaphysical background that are accustomed to thinking in terms of giving up the evils, the lacks and limitations, the ills and sins of our experience, and turning around and enjoying abundance or enjoying health or peace and harmony. In the earliest experience, actually that happens to us on our path in the infinite way. The first experiences we have appear as the overcoming of evil, the overcoming of discord, the overcoming of ill health, the overcoming of lack, the overcoming of unhappiness, the overcoming of hate, envy, jealousy, malice. And it would appear from that 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 is our goal, just the overcoming of those and the substituting of an abundant supply and an abundant health and so forth and so on. Actually, this is a temporary stopping place on the path towards spiritual awareness. It is a beautiful place to be when you first find some of your sins leaving you, hate, animosities, jealousies, intemperance, violence, lack, limitation, sickness, and to feel the greatest sense of human health, human virtues, human supply. But for those who linger there too long, the kingdom of God is lost for a long, long time. Because very quickly it must become evident, more especially to those of us who look upon Christ Jesus as the greatest, or certainly one of the greatest, spiritual revelators of all time. To us who look upon him in that way, we must go back to his message and note that he says, "My peace give I unto you, but not as the world giveth, give I unto you." My kingdom is not of this world. And when you stop to think of those passages, you are really up against a period of deep spiritual meditation and contemplation until you discover the meaning of those words. And you'll find then that he didn't consider a sufficiency of money or a sufficiency of health as anything to do with the kingdom of heaven. He went further into the realm of my kingdom and my peace, and then you realize what was meant by we can't know the things that God has stored up for those who love God. You cannot know the things that await the person who can glimpse the spiritual kingdom and realize what is meant by just those short passages, my peace, my kingdom. My kingdom is not of this world. My peace, not as the world giveth, no, my peace, spiritual peace. And then you'll find that there is a state of being that transcends not only the evils of this world, but it transcends the good of this world and shows you a good that the human mind can never dream of, the human mind can never be aware of, and our neighbors who have not yet penetrated this inner kingdom will never even know what we have discovered or be able to enjoy it if you could show it to them. Because it takes a spiritual capacity to be able to enjoy the things of the Spirit. The human mind can't do it, and the human body can't do it. The things of God are foolishness with man. The natural man receiveth not the things of God. And only when you rise, not only above the sins and diseases of the natural man, but when you rise above his virtues and his good, then do you begin to perceive what the kingdom of God is like. You will remember that the Master spoke of this in the Sermon on the Mount when he said that your goodness must be greater than that of the Scribes and the Pharisees. Well, as a matter of fact, there wasn't any good greater than theirs in those days, because of all the Hebrews, they were the strictest in being good. They would no more desecrate a holiday or forget one. They would no more break one of the laws of the Hebrew church or the Hebrew teachings. They were sticklers for absolute perfection in the carrying out of the Hebrew teachings. And yet he said, your goodness has to be greater than these. What is the goodness that's greater than that? It is the goodness that we find when we transcend just being good in the sense of the Ten Commandments goodness or obedience to legal laws. Thank you.